briefly talk about Death in the Trenches. We're going to try to make this a kind of short review compared to my usuals. And there, we screwed up the camera. Okay. So, this is one of a couple of games that I had to just stop playing because it was basically an unplayable burden. The only other one I can think of that definitely hit this level, I've had others where I've been able to play through a fair amount of it, and maybe I could have done that with this, because the other one was Chosen. Chosen had everything happened in like one hex of the game, and it was just like a huge pile of units, and I just couldn't get through that initial attack, and I feel like I couldn't review that at all, basically, other than it is unplayable at the beginning. This one felt similarly unplayable, but for a different set of reasons. Not because I had one huge stack of units, or maybe it was 3 stacks, I don't remember, that had to be attacked. But in looking at the rules, I feel like I've got a good enough grasp to be able to say, even if it wasn't such a hellacious experience to try to play this thing, the game is definitely not for me, and for a number of reasons. Now, the first and maybe most painful, most generally accepted as painful thing about the game, even among people who like it, is the counters have very, very tiny unit identification numbers on them, and they all have to be referenced by those unit identification numbers over on this general track. Wondering what was going on because this was here. Yeah, this general track here. And a bunch of those counters will just be, strength 20 or less. Well, the combat counters will all be strength 20 or less. So there's going to be a high concentration, a lot of duplication of location of counters. There's stacks of them in one place, and it is a pain in the ass to figure out the proper counter that you're looking for. As a quick sheet for that, I made something a little bit easier, a bunch of little cards that held strengths 1 through 20 for each nationality that has armies in the game. That's the major powers. And that definitely helped. In addition to that, you have to keep track of an army maximum. There are no counters for that, which, interestingly enough, and feels very odd to me, your armies basically recover their strength. They have a limit to how much they recover each turn, but whatever you lose doesn't really feel like casualties. It feels like combat effectiveness loss. And thus, you get a proportion. Well, you'd get your entire strength back, except that there are these limits on that chart, which are put here. And they really don't really need to be on here, but they tell you how many strength points that how many divisions you get back that you lost from your maximum. That is kind of the first problem, is that not the army maximum. The army maximum is actually an interesting idea, and it's the thing that makes the Madison combat system maybe work. It's not intuitive what it's doing. Like, you don't think about it and think, I just lost 20 divisions, or 20 divisions were made combat ineffective, or anything like that. You can't think on those terms. And in fact, because of his combat system, you can't consider it to be casualties or anything. You have to do some real serious imagining to come up with some kind of circumstance that an attacker who attacked too hard actually caused no casualties and took some. And the answer to that is, okay, the order to attack basically failed to happen, and the army just disintegrated under that order. And similarly, if you get a defender who, tried to defend too hard, that's what it seems like you did. What actually happened was, instead of taking your orders and remaining in place, they just abandoned their positions and retreated, and the army kind of disintegrated in the face of the enemy. Those both seem incredibly unbelievable, but they are more believable than the sort of naive view of what his combat system represents, or is trying to represent, which is that, I attacked really hard. I tried to cause a lot of casualties to the enemy, and whoops, I just missed. I took a wild swing. Might work well in a single hand-to-hand combat, that kind of combat system, but it doesn't make sense with armies involved or anything like that. And the same combat system is used in CSA, which I haven't gotten to yet, I think, but also in Liberia, which I did get to. In Liberia, it made absolutely no sense because it was lacking that army maximum. That army maximum, and the fact that the losses that you take in a turn may largely reconstruct, is kind of gives you a view that, I'm not actually losing my manpower here to any huge number, which is always the problem that I have in the resource-based games. I'm thinking here things like La Grande Guerre and Balance of Power, where one side is trying to attrition the other so hard, where they have sort of, maybe not the advantage in combat, but where they at least want to inflict some losses to make the other front able to resist the enemy better. Because it's World War I, you're probably not going to get an advantage out of actually attacking in and of itself, much as the generals seem to think that the newest advance would give them some ability to gain hexes or gain territory. Well, this kind of obviates that. It kind of puts it to the, okay, now I didn't get to make it to the end of a turn because, and this is the other facet, in addition to the lookups still being complicated even with my little things, there is a multiplier. So armies, the game centers on army counters for most of the great power units. Armies have 3 values written on the counter: an attack strength, a defense strength, and I don't remember what it is, a fortitude or something like that. It's an ability to take losses. And essentially, the number of divisions that you have, what you looked up on here, gets multiplied by the attack or defense strength of them. Sounds simple in concept. The reality of it is you end up adding up big numbers, writing them down, then using your calculator to figure out how many dice you want to roll. And the Ben Madison combat system, in case you didn't watch my intro or whatever, is basically, if you roll higher than your strength, you do no damage. if you roll equal to or less than the strength, you do the amount of damage you rolled. And you get to pick how many dice you roll. Feels like how many dice you roll is how hard you're actually attacking. As I expressed earlier, it doesn't work out that way. Like, maybe you intended to, but what you look at is an entire command and control collapse or something along those lines, where your entire army just falls apart, one way or another. Hard to believe. Not as hard to believe as they engage in combat, try really hard, and just missed, which is what the game naively seems to represent. Only the army maximums fix that. They're not present in Liberia. Maybe they're present in CSA. I don't know. In this game, maybe they are the out. And you have, in some of the random events, as they were, you have these random event capabilities that show up, and I mean, like, some of them add troops. For example, the Paris Taxis adds troops to your force, but doesn't add to your army maximum. So, like, I'm not quite sure what that means. It feels like your divisions are in two places at once, to be honest. You're just adding additional divisions or whatever, but you're getting them, you know, above and beyond your army maximum, which means they'll disappear at the end of the turn. It feels like they're ghost divisions that are like present in multiple places at once for that turn. Or temporary units. I don't know. It certainly doesn't feel like, you know, the Miracle on the Marne or whatever when they flung, you know, units that were in reserve in Paris forward. Those units just aren't on the map, but in this, they're on the map just somewhere else, and then they're in two places at once for a while, and then they disappear. I mean, there's just, like, I don't know. Maybe you can come up with some hand-wavy explanation for that, like I've tried to with other things. But it feels like it's just giving you this incredible flexibility where your units, although, you know, they actually were, I don't know. I just don't know. Yeah, the actual mechanisms of the combat system were what got me to give up. It is, I don't know, I could have gone with it, I guess, but I had gotten to the point where I just kept making errors in the process of coming up with the calculations that I needed to make. And basically, in order to figure out, do I want to attack a given hex? You have to figure out what the strength the opponent has in the hex and what strength you can bring to bear. And in order to do that, you have to do all these multiplications. Okay, granted, it's one multiplication. You do a big addition, you multiply it by the strength that particular army has. It felt like the strengths for the defensive strength for the Germans was too high. Or maybe the amount of divisions they had in the East Front was too high, because there is no way that the Russians would conduct their Tannenberg offensive. It was very, very hard to conduct any kind of offensive that looked like it was going to be palatable, like that it was going to give you any kind of advantage. In a lot of cases, fortifications especially were particularly effective because they're singular units which can't really be destroyed easily, as are these magical forces. I don't know what they're called. Minor forces, I think they're called, which are non-army units that are considered to be 2 divisions in size, but generally are much stronger than 2 divisions, and they have to be wiped out as a unitary thing. And you have, like fortresses, you have to get the full strength on them. So what I was seeing was an initial situation that did not look at all like August 1914. The offensive à outrance is optional, and you have a bonus for using it, but it's probably better used as a reaction attack, going, to try to block a hole or something along those lines. You have no requirement to do it. It's just a slight bonus that you lose if you don't use it, but the attacks would be so horrible you wouldn't want to use them unless forced to, and you're not. Likewise, the Tannenberg thing is, there's no way the Russians are going to launch an attack in East Prussia. Their strength, the strength of their attacking armies, of their attacking divisions, is less than half the defensive strength of the German units. And there are almost as many German divisions in East Russia as Rennenkampf and Samsonov's armies have present. Now, there is an event for Rennenkampf and Samsonov, fine. The Germans have no reason to use it in East Prussia. It flips over a Russian unit and makes it unable to act for a turn, basically. There's no reason to use it in East Prussia because those units aren't going to attack. And in fact, the Germans are well positioned to launch an attack out of East Prussia, except they only have one army there. If they had their army split, they would probably be able to beat both the Russian armies by using two different armies, or by protecting Königsberg and attacking with the majority of their forces at one and then swing to the other later. But you're just not going to see what actually happened in any sense of the word. So I'm seeing a totally obscene ahistorical situation develop in August 1914. That said, you can get really extreme results out of this game as well. It uses huge buckets of dice combat, which I don't have an objection against, but we saw the BEF absolutely wiped out by a combination of an event plus a pretty good attack by the Germans after they had cleared the Belgians out of the way. Vaporized. I'm not sure that the Germans could actually be stopped from the Schlieffen Plan working. So if you're a fan of the Schlieffen Plan, you might be happy about that. Speaking of events, all of them happen. So they're all known, but they might not happen at times that they're important. So one of them was, and I don't remember what it was called. I can find it here. It was not Rampaging Elephants. The Cruise of the Emden ended up eating up a handful, 4 British divisions. And I took them where I could, but a couple of them came off the BEF, and then the BEF got thrown in to try to defend Brussels, which, maybe it wasn't such a great idea, but whatever. And vaporized. It would be a lot weaker anywhere else, and I was hoping to maybe get lucky or something. I don't know. But yeah, the biggest things involve figuring out who's where because of the tiny unit identification numbers, and my eyes are not what they used to be. My lighting's not what it used to be either. And then multiplying out and getting those combat strengths. And you really kind of have to do most of this work just to decide, do I want to attack this hex? So the decision on whether or not to have a battle somewhere is a really, really expensive decision done up front. And then if you decide not to have a battle there, well, then you pick a different hex. It's a pulsed game, so you're constantly being faced with those same decision space. So my way of like walking away when I'm frustrated or something, and I was very often frustrated with this, doesn't work. There's a bunch of errata in it. Now, my understanding is that the Compass version trashed the old combat system and got rid of it. And I can only say bully for them, because the mechanism for combat is just too cumbersome to use, in addition to being almost completely undefensible and unbelievable. And I see some people saying things like, well, look, I know it may seem kind of unbelievable to do this combat system, but what it does is it just keeps you honest. No, it doesn't keep you honest. You try to pad, make sure that you're playing very conservatively. At least I felt like I was. And I'm still getting rolls that go over my total, and I end up doing nothing. So, whatever. And you need relatively large hits to get rid of magical forces or fortresses, which is another factor to it. The events themselves were also handled in a cumbersome fashion. Not so much the bunches of events. I don't like the fact that they all happen. I like my games to be a little bit more what-if-ish. Some of these are options that are available to the player. Some of them are these things, which are options that you can play. You put coins on them for how many times you get to play each one. And the problem with that is the amount of options that you have available is hard to keep in mind, and you have to hunt under your pennies or whatever you use to mark how many of each option you have. You have to go look those up every time to kind of familiarize yourself. Yes, maybe if you could cope with this game enough to play it multiple times, you would start getting used to what those options are and what you would want to do with them. But in the end, this is just a remarkably painful design. And the rules are kind of crap. They're very, very sparse. And again, there's errata that's in them that's both counters and map. I know people don't like those kind of errata, especially because they have to mark up their stuff. Some of them are just inexplicable, like, naming cities after locations that are less well known and less important. Basic concepts, etc., in the game aren't gotten across very, very well because of that sparseness. There were some ambiguities that I wasn't sure how to resolve, but those are relatively minor factors. The big one is the game is both almost unplayable due to the mechanical aspects required to make combat, and more importantly, to make combat decisions. Because once you get to the combat itself, fine. But to make a rational combat decision, you really need to go through a lot of effort up front. And then the combat itself doesn't tell you much of a story. It's not like Le Grand Guerre, where the combat system is cumbersome, but it gives you a nice narrative. Nah. This doesn't tell you anything. It may give you a completely unbelievable narrative, as I've opined about. And then the other thing is, I have absolutely no confidence that it's giving me any kind of believable, accurate model from what I saw in 1914. So yeah, at least unlike one of the ones I played recently, I don't remember whether it was Empires and Alliances. I think it was Distant Foreign Fields. I mean, I've done now 3 World War One games that are all competing for the worst World War One game I've ever seen this year. May Fatal Alliances change that. Yeah, and then actually no, 3 Grand Strategic, and then I've done Knocked Paris, which I also had a hellish time coping with, because that was just too cumbersome in too many ways as well. I don't know what's going on, but you know, the old World War One, Ted Racier's First World War, those are nice light ones. I'm not afraid to step into the deep end on my World War One games. I don't think they get any more deep endish than Le Grand Guerre. I do have to question whether I would still be able to face that the way I was, 25 years ago or whatever. But I think I would, if I gave up on it, it would be, this is too much for me, kind of like Summerstorm was, where yeah, I kind of believe in this, it's just not doing things the way I want them to. Well, that game does do things the way I want them to. Anyway, I can't recommend this, but I mean, if they ripped out the combat system in the new version and put a new one in that's more believable, it has to do with, lead units fighting and stuff like that, which is much more like Le Grand Guerre. I mean, how much else did they change? Because that's kind of the heart of the Ben Madison games, is that combat system, and it just doesn't work. But this one tries to save it. I feel like the Army Maxim goes a long way towards that attempt by making it such an abstraction where you're not dealing in actual casualties and whatnot. You may be dealing in, those armies are just ineffective and are falling back and are unwilling and unable to fight, and rather than actually taking the losses. Now, the Army Maximum, you don't gain it all back automatically. And I think I had taken enough losses on the French that they were not going to get all their armies back on that first turn. The Army Maximum itself can increase and decrease. Random events, for example, increase it or decrease it at times. I don't know. Anyway, I found this, I can't give it the full review because I didn't see enough of it to really speak to it, but what little I saw is so unbelievable that I can't imagine that the rest of the game, would have played out at all reasonably. You start on a weak beginning where August 1914 is just A, so random, and B, not believable, not allowing for the historical actions to be taken under any sort of reasonable play. Now, you could say, well, Tannenberg was a horrible idea. It really wasn't. If Samsonov and Rennenkampf had worked together, they probably should have destroyed the Eighth Army. There's no means for armies to really work together like that, in that kind of surrounding and working against things. So, I don't know. It's thoroughly disappointing. Somebody sent me this, really loved it. Another guy that I respected really loved it. I don't know what they see in it. Not in the least. That's it.